welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. My guest today is Dave Freiheit. And yes, I did have to ask Dave how to pronounce his last name before I started this podcast. So Dave is a Montreal lawyer, he's a YouTuber, and he's also a PPC candidate, which is why he's on the podcast today. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And for everyone out there, it's Freiheit, phonetically like Frei and Heit. And in German, it is verbatim freedom. Frei is free and Heit is the state of being.
Wow. Okay. So you basically have to be a PPC candidate with that type of last name.
It was funny because like growing up, everyone said, oh, you're a lawyer, your name is Freiheit, it's a good name. But I did like commercial litigation. So nobody cares about freedom when it's a question of money. But now it's more fitting. And for the billboards, it worked out perfectly. Liberté, freedom, Freiheit.
Perfect. And Dave, just before we get started, anything else you want to tell the audience about yourself? Anything I missed in the intro?
Oh, nothing that I don't know if anyone's followed me for a while, they'll know, but youngest of 5 kids, family of lawyers, dad's a lawyer. 4 of the 5 kids are lawyers. I think 2 of the in-law. The first one, he became very successfall. He's somewhere high up in Marriott hotels. I don't know what he does actually, but I know that he's there, and he didn't fall off the map. He just didn't finish law school and went on to get an MBA and a bunch of other good stuff.
He's not like a black sheep in the family.
I mean, in a way he was, but he was the lead black sheep. So it was only the 4 after him that got law degrees and went on to practice.
Right on. Well, man, again, thanks so much for coming on the show. So there's a lot of things that, I want to talk to you about. I actually did listen to some of the podcasts that Rex Murphy did with Jordan Peterson recently, and I'm really looking forward to I don't know when it's coming out, but the podcast with Bernier and Peterson. I mean, hopefully it comes out before the election in the next day or two.
Yeah, I think that's the plan. So hopefully.
But I wanted to start maybe just with a couple of things that they had mentioned. And first of all, like they had said that in terms of the debate itself, like they weren't necessarily debating a lot of the topics that a lot of people really wanted to be discussed. And I just don't know if you had any comments on just before we get into some of the subjects, just on the format of the debate, and like do the candidates actually get to choose what topics they debate in that particular platform?
I don't know how it works, but anybody who watched that would appreciate it was a political gong show. It was almost like intended to produce Jerry Springer type results, where you have a countdown 30-second timer for answers, which nobody respected anyhow. It was interrupting. It was just everyone was looking for their soundbite for Twitter as opposed to meaningful debate. And the irony was, we just had a debate in Westmount. The Westmount Municipal Association put on a candidates debate, and everyone who was certified by Elections Canada was invited. Garneau was there with Kaminsky, the conservative guy, NDP, Emma Weinstock. They had the Marxist-Leninist. They had someone from the Christian Heritage Party who was escorted off stage because she wasn't vaccinated. We'll get to that in a bit. But it was a longer format, 2 to 3 minutes, answer the question. And we had a more meaningful debate. And it serves everyone's interests, because when you have meaningful answers to the questions, you can actually see, on the one hand, what the Liberal Party stands for currently and what distinguishes the PPC from all the other people out there. But that political debate was a gong show. It was farcical, comical, but all anybody wanted was a few 10-second clips to run on Twitter, like Justin did. Except I found whatever highlights he posted on Twitter, I thought made him look bad, not good. But I'm not in charge of his PR.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that Justin's doing right now are not helpful for him. I mean, and in just calling the election, and that was another thing that Rex and Jordan discussed. Why did he call this election? And the only reasons I think they could think of is that possibly he was told that he was ahead in the polls, so this would be a good time to grab the majority government. But it wasn't something to do with the people. Like it wasn't something extrinsic. It was always something that he wanted to do internally to benefit him and to benefit his liberal government. That's the way I kind of saw it.
Well, so let's set aside, and I say conspiratorial in a good sense, not in the bad sense, like the political spin. Some people might think that there's people within the Liberal Party who want Trudeau out, so they egged him on to call an election knowing that he'll lose, or at the very least get a minority and get ousted through internal politicking. Some people think that. Other people think, yeah, he was going by the academics or the raw numbers. Like historically, when minority governments call an election, I think they call this a snap election, that they stand to benefit because people like stability, so they're going to be more inclined to vote in a majority that was previously a minority. Others might think Trudeau actually just wants out of politics, so calls an election knowing he'll lose. Setting all those theorizings aside, I mean, I'm glad he called it. I was deeply upset when all of the MPs had that what do they call it, a non-binding, that sort of symbolic vote not to call an election because it's so dangerous because we're in a pandemic. I was disturbed when they did that, and I'm glad he called it, because he needs to call this election while the trauma that he has caused the nation is still fresh in our minds. 2 years down the line, people might forget about what he did to this country over the last 2 years, effectively over the last 6 years, because 4 years of corruption preceded this 2 years of incompetence. But I'm glad he called it. I mean, I was livid when members of parliament voted not to hold the election because there's a pandemic. And I'm using the word pandemic the way they use it, knowing what's going on now, where our government encourages people in Iraq to go to voting booths when people are literally getting blown up and shot, saying, you guys go exercise democracy at your own risk, and our government doesn't want to exercise democracy in the context of this pandemic with these statistics. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and let's start to talk about some of Justin's faults. And I mean, the biggest thing for me, I mean, there's 4 or 5 things I'd like to get to today, but by far the biggest thing is the economy. So he's borrowing $500 million a day, right? And O'Toole did mention that in the debate, but like, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that if you're kind of not in Justin's position in some ways. Like, I'm someone who runs businesses. I'm part of board companies that are worth $100 million, but I mean, I can't imagine borrowing $500 million a day. So where is this money coming from, and what is it doing to our economy?
Well, I mean, it's either being borrowed or printed, neither of which are good, because it's got to be repaid. And if you print it, it makes it valueless. But the number 500 million a day, these are astronomical numbers. $1 trillion deficit. What really is the best way to frame it for me, in my mind, is $30,000 of debt per Canadian, and not per working Canadian. For everyone, a 2-day-old baby is now indebted for $30,000, and somebody's got to pay this back. And it's not just that somebody's got to pay it back. Where does the government get that money if it's not through selling arms to Saudi Arabia? It's through taxation, neither of which, in my view, are good means of government. But what they're doing is crippling the system even more, because you print out cash, you send checks, conveniently till a month after the election that you snap called, and you actually deter between the workforce. And I can't tell you, the night of the debate, I went to the coffee shop up the street. The guy's like, I can't find staff. The pizza shop down the street from me, the sushi shop, they can't find staff. When I was traveling through New Brunswick, they can't find people to work, because people are getting paid a decent amount now not to enter the workforce because of the CERB. And you end up killing the supply of work to these businesses that need them. You end up driving up prices, costs, and everything, so that it's great. You're handing cash out, which is going to be increasingly worthless, that has to be repaid, while crippling the economy to come back and actually generate the revenue the government needs to balance anything. But this is a guy who thought the budget would balance itself before a pandemic. Now he just, I don't like making the trust fund analogy, because I'm not comparing it to Justin Trudeau himself. But this is like how someone spends trust fund money not knowing how it got there. It's like, it's easy to spend other people's money when you haven't really understood how to earn it, and how an economy actually works to produce the wealth. Yeah, it's easy just to print and burn cash and actually suffocate the economy that needs to come back.
Yeah, so you made a lot of good points there. One thing is, again, about the printing of money, and we won't go into it too much in detail here, but in 1971 we abolished the gold standard, and because of that we had the Federal Reserve come into play, and then we could start to print money. And a lot of people are unaware of that history, and they're unaware of the fact that even though people are working more, their wages have remained stagnant or have not, increased as of the rate of the inflation. And then because we're just printing and printing money again, this money, like you said, has to be paid back. It's into circulation. Obviously, there's going to be, massive amounts of inflation, during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And the other, really good point that you made is, I mean, I've met people who have said to me, why would I work, when I'm only going to make, 2,500 or 3,000 a month, when I can sit and do nothing and just collect $2,000 a month and maybe do something, under the table or on the side that no one knows about, and get cash money and basically just make the same amount. And
it's even worse, because I mean, this has been a problem in Quebec for a long time. You have seasonal employment or seasonal unemployment, but what ends up happening is
same in Newfoundland too.
Yeah, people work under the table during the off season, get a good cash money and claim benefits, and then work during the season. I mean, the system was previously set up for this type of exploitation, and now it's just even worse, where the people who were laid off, first of all, I don't think they appreciate they're going to have to pay taxes on their CERB. A lot of people don't know this and are going to be in for one heck of a unpleasant return season, that you have to pay tax on the government, on the money the government gave you. And I mean, I got to just throw in the analogy to the house in the casino, where you circulate the money around all as much as you want. Eventually, the house gets it all. And so you have the government taking taxpayer dollars, using their administrative bodies and the costs that go along with it to redistribute that under the form of a CERB now, and then tax you on the CERB. I mean, this is the government just slowly but surely pilfering off a tremendous amount of wealth from the economy just to make their own wheels spin. But sorry, I had to throw that in.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, what you're saying here is like, there's a lot of deep manipulation going on. What the government seems to want is to have the masses completely dependent upon them. And how do you get the masses completely dependent on you? You take away their ability to work, and you give them just enough money so that they can live and be comfortable. And that's exactly what they've done. And, that's why, CERB is not a good solution, certainly not in the long term. And a lot of people are unaware of what we're discussing today.
And it's an amazing thing, like during the peak of the lockdowns, and even shortly after things started opening up, I drive through downtown. The only people out there working are federal employees, police, ambulances, construction workers, state workers, federal and provincial state workers. And it's nice, people are working. Who pays? I mean, people don't appreciate that they are paid through taxpayer dollars that the government redistributes, takes their own cut through their own salaries. And we're going to get into that, because I don't think people realize how much our politicians have been making without the slightest interruption to their paychecks. But that's not how an economy can work, because you're basically just, the government is paying everybody, but the government doesn't make the money, they make it from taxation. And yes, you get everyone in a position where they're utterly dependent on the state, and it becomes very easy to manipulate and coerce. Police are not going to defy the orders of their bosses when they come in with these measures, because they need to support their families. And so you basically create a massive government state where everybody works for the government, is either dependent on the government or subservient to the government. And it's great for government, but it doesn't lead to a sustainable economy. And we've seen the way it pans out in areas south of the border, Venezuela, for example. But it's creating a system that's going to break. And it may not affect the political elite. Certainly it won't affect those who have been drawing $400,000 a year during this pandemic to give medical advice to shut down, but it will affect everyone else.
Yeah, I actually was, pretty unaware. I mean, I didn't really look into, how much the MPs were getting paid, or how much, some of these people at the COVID science table were getting paid. So do you mind just speaking on that, a little bit more?
My understanding is, standard MPs are getting $170,000, give or take. If they're members of a cabinet, they get more. I think maybe upwards of $250,000. All that I know is the medical officers, without naming any in particular, but out of Ontario, like $340,000 a year. I mean, these people, and they're getting paid while saying, you guys stay at home and it's too dangerous. Stay at home, we'll give you $2,000, or bankruptcy, whatever goes along with this, but we're getting paid. And my goodness, we want to keep the power that we've gotten over the last 2 years, because it's great power. It's shocking the amount the CMOs are getting, the chief medical officers, or it's shocking.
And I'm glad that you're discussing this, because I think that a lot of people, and myself included, are kind of shocked at some of the dollar signs that you or the dollar values that you're throwing out there. And then just coming back to some of the debt too. So I know that it was thrown out that because of the debt that we've accumulated, we're going to be in debt until 2070. Have you heard this figure, or is this something that?
I've heard a bunch. I mean, but what is it now? I think it's $1 trillion deficit.
1.3 trillion, I think, is. Yeah.
How do you? I mean, even talking about balancing it is ridiculous. How do you balance something like that? You have to get into the net positive, or even stop the net loss. And then while we're talking about this deficit, what is Trudeau doing? I mean, he's promising $1 billion for a COVID app. He's promising $6.5 billion. Oh no, sorry, it might be $4.5 billion for mental, mental relief for trauma that he himself has caused through these measures. I mean, it's like I put out a tweet. It's like promising $4.5 billion to treat the mental anguish that you've caused through these lockdown measures is like the mobsters paying for your crutches after they break your knees. I mean, it's like it's except they're paying for it with your money, by the way, because that's not his it's not his billions of dollars walking around promising Canadians their own tax dollars to remedy the damage that he has caused and that the government has caused. And in a meaningful sense, I'm not blaming all the bad stuff on the government. I'm blaming a lot of the exacerbated results on government incompetence. But in the meantime, they fined $150 million provincially for COVID ads while telling the hospital system to cut $150 million from their budgets. It
doesn't make any sense. And I know there's a lot of nurses right now who are really fed up, who are really overworked, who aren't paid very well. And, again, technically I'm a government worker. I mean, I'm a doctor, I work in, a socialized medical system here in Canada. So, the government pays me. And even years ago, a lot of doctors were very upset about how they were getting paid. And, they were basically just, left our wages very stagnant for, a long time. And, a lot of people are upset about that. But I mean, that's going to be everybody now. Like, if everybody is dependent on the government, then, things are never going to increase. You're not going to get paid more if we just keep going into debt. I mean, how can you pay teachers more, nurses more, doctors more? How can police, firefighters, like, how can you pay these people more money if you're just constantly going into debt? And you need to be able to pay them more money just because of inflation. And now it seems like we're going to have this massive increase in inflation without an increase in wages, which means everybody's going to be poorer.
People don't appreciate this. Pay them more as much as you want. We had to do some work that involved wood. And the construction guys told us that wood is 3 times more now than it was a year or two ago. You see it in the grocery store. It's a little bit less, but it adds up everywhere. It's just, okay, fine. My salary is worth 4% less now than it was 6 months ago. And it's waste on the one hand, and it's waste that doesn't actually achieve any meaningful results on the other. Like early on in the pandemic, I guess we might be getting into my problems with Trudeau, but they make decisions which exacerbate the problem. Then they spend our money to try to solve those problems that they caused through their incompetence. It's a vicious circle of insanity. There's no other way of putting it.
One you said was absolutely perfect. Didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just want to make that point that it's almost like getting someone addicted to drugs because you made a very, very poor policy, or you really interfered with their mental health because you shut down their gym, you took away their ability to work. Then you have your family kind of on top of you because you're all trapped in the same house without anywhere to go. This is happening to a lot of different people, and then because of that, obviously these people are needing help, and then they're throwing money at them afterwards. But it's like, you created this problem. If you just let the person work, they wouldn't have had all these mental health problems. They wouldn't have had an addiction. They wouldn't have felt like crap and gone, to the LCBO and started drinking alcohol if they were just able to work, able to go to the gym, able to do the things that they want to do previously. So I completely agree with you that they're creating their own problem and then they're throwing money at it. So it's a complete waste.
And it gets even worse because you've noticed, and anybody who's following the campaign trail has noticed how Trudeau has turned hard onto the children. You don't put my children, those people putting my children at risk. He's doing it again this morning. He tweeted, I met a girl 9 years old. Last year, she wrote me, wanted her grandparents to get vaccinated to protect her. We should all get vaccinated to protect kids. I sent him the statistics. There were 300,000 cases in kids 19 and under. I think there were 1,500 hospitalizations and 15 deaths. That is the deaths, 0.00005% death rate. His measures and François Legault's measures have killed more kids than COVID itself by an incomparable amount. And so they have devastated psychologically, economically, spiritually, a demographic that was at minimal risk and continues to be at minimal risk. Then they promise money to solve the problem that they've created. And then they continue to harp and promote this fear porn, exaggerated fear, invoking the children in order to continue pushing their own mistakes. And you can only, people say, like, is it malice or is it incompetence? And at one point, does incompetence become malice? I don't ask that question anymore. The outcome is the same. And thank goodness that he called the election, because it's the litmus test. It's going to be the referendum on this lunacy. The only problem is, geez, the conservatives seem to think it's popular to espouse some of these views, and so they'll flip-flop as they need in order to get the political traction they want. And so it doesn't seem like any of these parties have any real plan to solve these problems. They're just going to continue exacerbating it. Can you imagine? He promised now, I think it was $1 billion to increase healthcare workers, to increase the hospital system, which we have known has been a problem for decades, and which they are now exacerbating by imposing this vaccine passport, where they're going to lose.
ICUs have always been overwhelmed. Every year, the ICUs are overwhelmed. Our hospitals are overwhelmed. That's been going on, ever since I've been a medical student. It's been an issue.
Yeah, 2018, Toronto suspended elective surgeries because the flu season was particularly bad. And we've known from the beginning of this pandemic, they were understaffed. They were ill-equipped, partially because Trudeau thought it was a good idea to give away 16 tons of PPE to China in February 2020, knowing the pandemic was coming. Then the pandemic hits. Government knew it was coming. Nobody else did. Long-term care facilities don't have the supplies they need. They get smashed. The exacerbates deaths of the elderly in these facilities. But now 2 years later, he's promising to invest in healthcare while squandering $1 billion on an app, while imposing a vaccine passport that's going to push healthcare workers out of the system. So the government, in all their glory and in all their knowledge, say an empty bed in a hospital is less of an existential danger to the system than an unvaccinated healthcare worker who's asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, or, dare I say it, doesn't even have COVID, which is probably going to be the case in 99.x%. So they've made the decision that to push, it is riskier to have an unvaccinated healthcare worker in the system to service a bed or service whatever infrastructure is needed than it is to have an empty bed in the hospitals. And then they're going to say hospitals are overloaded again, blame it on the unvaccinated, and then go for another shutdown, lockdown, whatever, because they don't have the beds to meet the needs, because they've pushed out the staff to service the beds, and so they shut down those beds themselves.
I want to definitely talk about your point that you just made about the staff and the shortage of beds, but also another point you made earlier, Dave, was about statistics regarding children. And I put this tweet out now, I think twice. I did yesterday again. And this is CDC data, and they've said that for children under 9 years of age, and you can look at the exact tweet just to make sure I'm quoting it correctly, that the flu and pneumonia is significantly higher, like more than 3 times higher in that age category. And then they broke it down again between the ages of 9 to 14, and still the flu and pneumonia is more deadly than COVID. So, I do definitely agree with you that, people are, using kids inappropriately in this sense, and it's fine, to use that. But if you're going to use that, you have to look at everything else, because if you say that, you're so concerned about COVID for kids now, why weren't you so concerned about the flu and pneumonia for kids every single year previously? That's doing much, much more damage. That's much, much more deadly. So to me, that doesn't make any sense at all. Nobody should be using that argument. And you're right. Like, it's either, incompetency, malice, or some type of combination of the two.
And it's not just that, it's that they're so myopic now. They've shifted the, is it the Overton window or just the goalposts? It went from 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and now they've discreetly gone to COVID zero. And they're so myopic.
Which is not possible. There's COVID zero is not possible.
It's not that we will be living with this virus or any variation mutation forever. That's the way it's going to be.
Yes,
they look
100%.
Only at this one statistic: COVID for children, and they pick 15 kids. Yes, and it's 15 kids. One kid is a tragedy, but you have to compare it to what is going on with kids now. You have, last I checked, overdoses were, if not 50% more, 100% more. Calls for to suicide lines were up 200%. Self-harm, anxiety, and that's a number that is exponentially higher than what COVID risks are for kids, exponentially higher.
And I can tell you, just through my own practice, I mean, I do see some children, but mostly adult-based practice, but a lot of people are really struggling during COVID. Like they said that, my anxiety, my PTSD, my depression, is getting worse. My practice is a family care practice, but, I do probably mostly mental health just because of the nature of the medicines that I prescribe. But, I can tell you that, and when I've chatted with other colleagues too, they've said, like, I would say about 85% of my patients have become worse since COVID began. And I mean, what do you expect? Like, we know that socialization is extremely important for people. And I mean, I'm someone who, I enjoy spending time on my own. I enjoy reading. I enjoy, solitary activities, but I absolutely need, some socialization sometimes. And I think, that goes for basically everybody. So when you take away someone's ability to work, their ability to socialize, their ability to go to the gym, their ability to leave their house, I mean, what do you expect people's mental health state to be?
And even go beyond the mental health, because there are stats that show a decreased life expectancy with every, or increased death rate with every percentage point of unemployment. But forget.
Yes, it's a good point.
And even the spiritual, emotional stuff aside, physiologically, we had experts from the beginning, and this is not me talking. I'm just a lawyer. I just know how to analyze information. We had experts saying you don't lock down the healthy because you're going to make them more vulnerable to other viruses. You're going to weaken their immune systems, and you're going to hurt the healthy more than you are protecting them. And then lo and behold, an article out of CNN talking about how pediatric wards in the United States are overflowing with kids, but not from COVID, from standard rhinoviruses, seasonal viruses that their bodies, after a year and a half of the proverbial bubble, as the doctor referred to it, are incapable of fighting now, or more susceptible to. And so this is why, like, at the end of the day, the government rarely makes things then when you leave it to individual decisions. I see people criticize me for only criticizing and not offering solutions. But I said from the beginning, the solution is protect the vulnerable, and you let those who are the least at risk live their normal lives to maintain a system to actually protect the vulnerable. And what does the government do? They shut down everybody. They basically hurt the healthy more than they could have ever protected them. They destroy the system to the point where apparently close to 1 for every 2 COVID deaths in the long-term healthcare was because of neglect, malnourishment, because they didn't have staff. You cripple the system to the point where the staff are understaffed and they have to circulate from one long-term care facility to another, infected, exacerbating the spread among the most vulnerable. So it is what I call fractal wrongness, is that it's basically been wrong decisions every step of the way, but they're wrong decisions that empower the government, that empower the states, that empower police to go around issuing tickets instead of actually, combating the actual problem and resolving it and making it better. But no, it's good. François Legault spent $150 million, $13 million a month on ads, pays his police force to go out and issue record numbers of tickets. I think Quebec issued like $13 million in tickets. I may be wrong on the numbers, but they're astronomical numbers, and I'm pretty sure I'm not. Quebec has the record for tickets issued, because that's what's going to fight it. I saw the police in Mount Royal Park during the peak of this enforcing social distancing, when the dog runs were locked out, when the playgrounds were shut down. I mean, it's been fractal wrongness, fractal incompetence from the very beginning. And where do you go from here? It doesn't seem the Conservatives are in the mood to be the opposition that they ought to have been to this fractal incompetence from the beginning.
Well, the Conservatives are definitely acting more like liberals, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But, in terms of staffing, like, let's just talk about that. Like, why do we have such a big staffing issue right now in these long-term long-term healthcare facilities? Like,
in the
what
system in
is the
general.
issue?
Well, I mean, I've spoken to some. I mean, this is not like my political run, and I don't like citing my anecdotal experience or evidence. I was in the hospital for a couple of reasons recently, not urgent and nothing serious. I just talked to the doctors and casually, not in their face type with a mic. The doctors say, we've been understaffed, conditions are terrible, nurses are overworked, underpaid, bad conditions, and they just burn out. And so, again, people accuse me of only criticizing. No, you want to know how you incentivize workers to join the labor force? Instead of squandering $1 billion on an app, how about it's even a cost-free solution? Just don't charge people in the healthcare system income tax. Incentivize people to enter the system through income tax-free salary. And so the government won't get its cut from their salary, but it doesn't have to put out money either to incentivize people to get into the system. And maybe the vaccine passport idea is idiotic to the point where you have to be either malicious or incompetent to impose it and push tens of thousands of healthcare workers out of the already strained system, as if most people don't have COVID, even if they might be carrying it, as if the risk of pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic spread is so great that you need to kick them out of the system.
It's so low.
It's I won't say infinitesimally low, because I don't know when something becomes infinitesimal.
I'll tell you how low it is. It's
1 in a million.
There was a study done that even if you lived with someone in the same household and they had COVID, but they were asymptomatic. And I'm talking about living with someone, not passing by them in the grocery store. Living with someone, it's 1% or less. So I live with just my girlfriend. So say if I had COVID, like my girlfriend Emily would then have a 1% risk of getting it just by living with me. I mean, that's when you're asymptomatic.
Yeah, but and then go one step further. Even if you get it, even if you get it, and that 1% chance, if your girlfriend, I presume, is of the 99.97%, 99.99% survival bracket, so you go from the infinitesimal to the even more infinitesimal. But you have leaders like Justin Trudeau walking around looking at the unvaccinated, not like they're contaminated, COVID positive, already sniffling and sneezing at the nose, looking at them like they're a loaded gun. And people internalize that to the point where it depresses me, to the point where of actual virtual tears of frustration, but not tears of sadness. I'm walking my dog this morning. I see a woman outside with a mask alone. And as I'm walking down the alley, she literally hides behind a post as I walk by her, and then goes back onto the street. That's the type of trauma. That is trauma. That is spiritual and psychological trauma, where you effectively lose all rational thought and you just revert into fear response on a minutely basis. I went to vote. I voted for myself, spoiler alert, but I went to vote, and they ask you to put in your info, telephone number for contact tracing. And I was like, we're 80%, 77.5%, 78% double vaccinated in Canada. I think we're closer to 80 in Quebec. Of the people who are going to vote, I guarantee you it's 99% vaccinated, especially in my demographic. They still make you wear the mask. They make you social distance. You got all your red flashing neon light signs of fear and everything. Then they ask you to put in your number and your name for contact tracing. You would think you're swimming through Chernobyl with what they're doing. And people internalize it, and then it becomes the new standard of what they think is the actual fear compared to what is the actual risk. And it's conditioning that has to be undone, but cannot ever be undone by the people who caused the trauma in the first place. These people have outstayed their welcome, and they've caused damage that they themselves are now incapable of remedying.
And in terms of the vaccine passport itself, I mean, that's definitely something that I wanted to chat about today. So you guys are the only political party who oppose the vaccine passport, which I think is fantastic. And, I'm not even someone who's, against the vaccine. Like, I wish it was more effective than it is. And I'm not saying that it's not effective. It does, appear to be, based upon the data that I've seen. I check generally Jennifer Kwan's Twitter, pretty often, almost daily. There's another guy, Ed Tubb, I check daily. And so, I'm sort of, maybe I'm being naive, but I'm, believing, the data that they've put out. And the data that they've put out indicates that, the vaccine seems to be fairly effective at preventing, severe disease, seems to be less effective at preventing transmission. I think some of the numbers that Jennifer put out yesterday was that, you're about 6 times more likely to be infected with COVID if you are double vaccinated. But in terms of the ICU, you're about 30 times more likely to be infected with COVID if you're unvaccinated. Sorry, I think I said
you said it the other way around. But
yeah. So anyway, so according to that data, it looks like the vaccine is effective. Again, maybe I'm naively trusting this data, but according to that, it appears to be effective. But even if it is completely correct, I still think that we should not be implementing the vaccine passport. And if you look at some of the studies in Denmark and how they've done it, they have indicated that they did not medically coerce people into getting the vaccine, and now they have a completely open and free society as of I think a day or two ago. And they said that one of the main strategies that they used was that they didn't shame people into getting the vaccine, just like we don't shame people into losing weight. I mean, that's another conversation, but I mean, fat shaming is something that we in society basically have collectively said that we shouldn't be doing, and I just don't know why the same principle isn't applied to vaccines.
Well, it's twofold. First of all, I mean, you want people to resist more. You tell them they have to do it as opposed to try to convince them they should do it. And I've talked about this on my channel with Robert Barnes. Is like when you've lost the argument side of things and you go into compulsion, coercion. They call it incentivizing. And again, I'm going to go back to the mobster. There's a difference between incentivizing and coercing. And what the government is doing is not incentivizing people to get vaccinated any more than putting a gun to somebody's head is incentivizing them to give you their money. I mean, it's coercion, period. And I said this from the beginning with the mask mandates. If you just made it, optional and appealed to people's good sense, you would get as much participation. I think maybe a little less, but you'd get as much participation willingly than you would if you make it law. And with the vaccine, I mean, you got a tremendous amount of voluntary participation by and large because the people who are at risk don't need to be convinced, and they don't need to be compelled. But then you get into the lower demographics where they're not at risk; they can make decisions. In fact, they might even have more meaningful risks of adverse effects. If we're allowed to talk about this, I don't know where this is going.
Sure, but yeah, we can.
A study just came out that showed that like adolescent boys were 6 times more likely to be hospitalized from adverse effects of the vaccine than from COVID, considering that they had virtually no chance of being hospitalized from COVID in the first place. So myocardial heart inflammation, I can never pronounce it.
Myocarditis.
Myocarditis. So they get hospitalized, but there are potentially serious issues about that. The bottom line, once the government starts coercing you to do things, people push back even more. Whereas if they had just gone with the rational, here's the information, make your own decisions, as a responsible government should, you'd get less pushback, you'd get less conspiracy issues, fears, you would get less principled pushback, because I'm double vaccinated, but I'm pushing back twice as hard when the government starts imposing a vaccine passport on kids as young as 13 years old, because it's unscientific for the party that says they trust the science, and it's unconstitutional for the lawyer who still thinks the law should mean something.
Yeah, and just to follow up a little bit on the myocarditis, that situation is a little bit tricky, and I think that people should be able to make their own decisions. So, there was one study that I saw fairly recently that said that, if you get COVID, like COVID itself actually does predispose you more to myocarditis than the vaccine itself. But the thing is that what are your chances of getting COVID? So, basically you have to make the decision, do I want to, get the vaccine and then definitely expose myself to a higher risk of myocarditis, or should I just simply, not get the vaccine and then, deal with the consequences of potentially having, a higher risk of COVID if I in fact do get it. So, I think there's a little bit of a dilemma there. And, I think that it should be a decision that people make. I don't think that, they should ever be, medically coerced. And coming back to that again, I mean, they say that, you know, they're not, I mean, I mean, now they are in some ways mandating the vaccines, but I mean, if you're saying that, you know, you can't work, or you can't, you know, travel, you know, you can't go to a restaurant without the vaccine, I mean, that is coercion. I mean,
Well,
you can't say that, you know, that like that it's not. It's like, hey, yeah, you can't get the vaccine, we believe in freedom, but, you know, you're just not going to be able to do anything. You
no,
know, I mean,
and you
that
have
is coercion.
it's beyond that. It's gangsterism. It's institutionalized gangsterism, where Justin Trudeau is now saying you have the choice not to get vaccinated, but don't expect to lead a normal life afterwards. I mean, what is that other than segregation? That's like saying you have the freedom to practice whatever religion you want, but don't think that we don't get to discriminate you against you based on your religious preferences. I mean, and then I made the joke a while back, and it's just a sick, sad joke because it's true. When the government takes your rights away, they say emergency. When it comes time to give them back, they say, what rights? These are just privileges. You never had the right to go to a restaurant. You never had the right to go to a gym. You never had the right to live a free life in Canada. Those were all privileges. And if you want those privileges back, do as we say. I mean, this is how abusers talk. And this is not a question of, you know, Ebola. This is not a question of the extremist examples where maybe this could be justified on a purely temporary basis. This is 2 years into nearing 2 years into a health emergency, with the statistics that we know exist right now that could not possibly justify any of this, even on an urgent basis, let alone nearing 2 years into it, where the government can't seem to find the time to actually debate these issues, to actually pass them as regular laws so that they are subject to scrutiny, debate, discussion, presentation of evidence. They have gotten into the habit of ruling like dictators through fiat, through no public discourse, through no public debate, through no standard democratic legislative process. And it's always under the basis of an emergency that we're 2 years into for our own protection, which is for some people scientifically incorrect and indeterminate. It's just as long as we need to. And it's an ever-moving goalpost. Do it. When we hit 70%, we'll get back to normal. Oh, we're already at 80%? No, now it's the 18% unvaccinated who are ruining everything for everybody. They're putting your kids at risk. They're putting my kids at risk. So shift the target, move the goalposts, demonize a new demographic so that you can justify the never-ending oppressive government measures that have basically turned Canada into something that more closely resembles North Korea than what Canada was ever intended to look like.
Yeah, it seems like every time we comply, they just give us more restrictions, which is insane. So I just don't understand how people aren't recognizing this. You know, like there's been compliance after compliance after compliance in Canada, yet the more we comply, it seems like the more restrictive our society is. But also too, I really want to, you know, chat about, because I don't know too much about this, so hopefully you're going to have some insights on the QR code. Like, so that's going to be implemented, I think not next month, but the month after. So, you know, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can't tell you about the QR code because I haven't downloaded it. I'm not going to, and I will not enter an establishment that treats me like a cattle and asks for my paper. They call it a certificate now. The government is great at creating euphemisms to hide what they're actually doing. They don't want to call it papers because that's too reminiscent of another era in time. So they call it certificates, QR code, and the outcome is effectively the same. In Quebec, they started the policy on September 2nd or September 1st. There was a 2-week grace period, and now it's mandatory. Now you're subject to huge fines. Now they've turned citizens into the police of the state to police other citizens. So they've turned citizens against citizens, private business owners into actual, you know, they're unofficial police.
You're incentivized for telling on your neighbor, right? You're incentivized for telling on your neighbor.
CBC ran an article early on entitled "The Joys and Perils of Snitching on Your Neighbor During a Pandemic." I mean, the government has pitted Canadians against Canadians, citizens against citizens. They've increased the cost of doing business because everybody now has to have a dedicated staff member to checking the papers of patrons. They have to have a dedicated staff member to basically act like the police state that the government itself doesn't have the courage and audacity to be. Let the government put a police officer in front of every small business and see what the country looks like. Now they have those officers. They're just plainclothes because they've turned citizens into them. But so they've
Very
implemented
good
this.
point. I never thought about that. That's a very, very good
It's a
point.
beautiful visual. Like imagine instead of the employee of the restaurant, the employee of the gym, imagine you have a government officer there wearing a badge, carrying a gun, checking your papers for entry. I mean, that's what they've done. They're disguised police agents of the state now. But we've implemented it. It's the most egregious thing I could have possibly imagined, because you're basically saying now that asymptomatic of the 20% who are unvaccinated for whatever the reason, if they have religious, medical, or conscientious objections, of those 20%, of the fraction of a percent who are in fact asymptomatic carriers, because if you're sick, stay home. We don't need to be told that. But for the fraction of a percent of the 18% who are asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic carriers, in the event that they carry it, transmit it to someone who is double vaccinated, then that person gets sick. And we are into the realm of irrational stats to justify the measure. But someone told me, and it's not exaggeration. It's not like maybe the story didn't happen. It happened. Kids in high school getting turned away from trying out for their sports teams because they weren't vaccinated. 13-year-old kids turned away on the field when their entire classmates, I get so angry thinking about this, when 40 other kids are watching these kids be turned away like they're lepers, like they're of a different dirty caste, that they can't be among other children. And then they want to talk about the damage that this causes. Oh, they'll promise mental anguish treatment to these kids. But there's nothing. Oh, I think I lost you, Mike. If you're still there, I'll keep going. But
no, I'm still here.
I see your image, but there's nothing on earth. There's nothing out there. There's nothing scientific, nothing statistical that could justify this vaccine passport. And it comes after virtually everyone who was going to comply has complied. And it comes at a time after Justin Trudeau himself, 6 months ago, saying, what about people with allergies? What about people with medical conditions? What about people with deep religious or moral convictions that choose not to get vaccinated? And I'm quoting, we're not a country that makes vaccinations mandatory. And then 6 months later, literally his election campaign ad is, I believe that vaccinations should be mandatory. And in the ad, because he's a perpetual liar, it said for airline and train travel. And lo and behold, he's promising $1 billion app to make it mandatory for gyms, cafes, theaters, and everything. It's a never-ending power grab, and it's a never-ending constitutional rights grab by a government that is incompetent, corrupt, and ultimately more destructive than it is useful.
I had no idea actually that they were, pulling kids off the field for not getting vaccinated. I mean, as someone who, played sports when I was younger, I mean, that was a massive part of my childhood and growing up. And, all of my, like when I played hockey when I was younger, basically all of my friends, played hockey, or most of them did. And then even when I got older, and I moved to different places, I originally grew up in Newfoundland. I'm in Ontario now. I'd always kind of find a hockey game and then make friends with people at those games. So, it's people don't understand how detrimental, this is to young kids, by not allowing them to participate in sports. You're really taking away their ability to learn not only the skill of playing the sport and getting, physical activity, which is so important, but also, the importance of, just developing friendships, and understanding, teammates and hard work and the ability to get along with others. Like that's all being taken away. And, you only get a small window for that. Like you're not a child forever. And eventually, these children are going to be adults and they're going to be missing these skills. And when they're missing these skills, it's going to lead to, sure, it's going to lead to acute problems right now with mental health, but it's also going to lead to long-term adult problems with mental health.
There's the old expression, I don't know who said it, hurt people. And
yes.
They will hurt themselves and they're going to hurt other people. I mean, that's the longer term stuff. But even more important, it's not even a question of just being turned away from trying out for soccer and getting the healthy activity is good for kids. It creates this division between the students. And you actually I was talking to the person and they were saying, I said, how did the other people react? And they said, oh, some people said they should have just gotten vaccinated. Others said it's their choice. Too bad for them. You create discussions among kids that they're never supposed to have among kids. Kids are not supposed to look at other kids and say, those kids are dirty. Those kids are a danger. They have to be treated differently. Give them a separate water fountain because all they had to do was get vaccinated. This is not the type of pressure that should be put on kids, especially insofar as they are not vectors in any meaningful sense, and to treat them like they are lepers, like they are existential threats to their friends for not being vaccinated, it's unscientific, but it's unconscionable. And that's it. That's where the vaccine passport is at in Quebec. Oh gosh, no, but Mike, it reminds me of the story. I read an article in Florida Times. It was some hack journalism, absolute fake news nonsense. It says the title was "Healthy 16-year-old hospitalized for COVID pneumonia in both lungs," and then the subtext was, she followed all the rules. She stayed at home for a year and a half. She didn't leave home very often for a year and a half, constantly disinfected, and wore a face mask whenever she went outside. And then I read the article and I look at the picture of the healthy 16-year-old. The girl, I don't think would have ever put herself in this position of her own choice, but leave it to exploitive journalists to try to make to try to exploit someone to promote a narrative. But this girl was morbidly obese. Apparently her mother had diabetes. The girl had sleep apnea. The girl hadn't left the house in a year and a half, wore a face mask all the time, and constantly disinfected. And that's what these journalists are trying to tell us is healthy. That is the exact opposite of what is a healthy lifestyle for a kid. And what is the government doing right now? They're actually, other than coercing a medical procedure on kids, they are basically promoting the idea that the most unhealthy lifestyle is healthy. And the effects, we're seeing it now. But the bottom line also, what drives me nuts, and people who are even pro-passport are going to realize this. They think they're compliant now with their 2 shots. You look at Israel, where they're now up to, I heard someone say more than 4, but I'll just even say 4 shots, 2 shots and 2 boosters. When people start getting excluded because they haven't had their booster or their second booster, and they start saying, well, my body's not just a receptacle for the medicines of the state, then they're going to realize, hey, maybe I didn't think this vaccine passport idea through properly because I didn't know where it was going to go. I thought it was going to stop here. They'll get to that point. And when they get to that point, there's only going to be one political party on the Canadian political landscape that's going to be there defending their rights. Okay, because I tweeted this out a while back, when a month ago, when Justin Trudeau came out with his, those people are putting us all at risk. And I spent so long editing that video together that everyone in my house was walking around the entire day going, those people. When he said those people are putting us all at risk, and sure, he's talking about the anti-vaxxers. And I said, I tweeted out afterwards, like, we know the stats on who is more reluctant to get vaccinated for quite legitimate historical reasons. In the United States, the Black population, I think, are vaccinated up at 25% compared to 75% of the white population.
It's insane.
It's insane. And so I just put together a montage. Those people, and I was showing the stats that, Blacks, Latinos in Canada, more reluctant. The indigenous population were vaccinated at about 52%, 20% under white population. So when you say those people, and when you say they don't get to have the same civil rights and liberties as the rest of us, you are indirectly, but necessarily, disparately impacting ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and minorities who have been historically discriminated against in Canada. And lo and behold, we get to our debate, and there's 8 candidates on stage. I forget how many, 7 or 8. One of them is from the Christian Heritage Party, and I didn't even know what was going on. We're all on stage, and I see security come up to the stage, and I, being neurotic, thought they were coming for me for whatever the reason, but then she just discreetly gets pulled off stage. And then the 2 guys, Mark Garneau and the Green Party candidate, just, casually slide over, take her space. So we all get more space. And I wanted to tell them to leave that space empty for the entirety of the debate so that we could see what we're living in terms of a Canada. But I addressed it in my opening statements saying, this is the Canada that I see right now, and I barely recognize it. The woman, she's exquisitely well educated, like engineering degree, a master's. She's from the Christian Heritage Party, so I can only assume she has moral objections to the vaccine, perhaps given what goes into the research. She happens to be Black as well. Just discreetly escorted off stage so that the rest of us could take her place and pretend she never existed in the first place. As if, and to go back to it, this individual, healthy young woman, even if she happened to be 1 in 1,000 with pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic carrier of COVID, is she going to give it to anyone else in that room who is double vaccinated? I mean, it is a policy that was necessarily going to have disparate impacts on underprivileged, racial, ethnic, religious minorities. But historically, the Liberal government, like it doesn't give a sweet bugger all.
I mean, when you get the vaccine, the whole point is that then you shouldn't be afraid to be around someone who is unvaccinated. That's the whole point of getting the vaccine.
And
It's
here's
not
the
so
irony.
that you can, just be around other vaccinated people. Is that so if you get exposed to the virus, you don't get sick? That's the whole point of the vaccine.
Well, but it's even worse than this. The irony now is they say the unvaccinated are the risk to the vaccinated. I made the joke, but lo and behold, it's turning out to be more the case. If the unvaccinated are more likely to be asymptomatic carriers and they can still carry and transmit, if they don't know that they're carrying it because they don't show symptoms, they're in fact the greater risk to the unvaccinated because the unvaccinated are vulnerable or more vulnerable. But, it's the idea that I'm sitting next to Mark Garneau and he says at one point in the debate, the unvaccinated don't have the right to put me at risk. And I said, well, I guess you don't believe in the vaccine all that much. I mean, I guess you don't believe in the efficacy of the vaccine if in order for you to be protected for something that you've gotten the vaccine from, someone who, if someone phrased it in a very ironic way, I may have screenshotted it, but you're so confident in the vaccine that you who've gotten it need someone else who hasn't gotten it to get it in order not to get you sick from getting it. I mean, it's a circle of nonsense.
It is. Some extent. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, and there's just an issue or two that I wanted to touch on. So, what is the Policies Party on immigration?
People's Party. So we get called the party gets called anti-immigrant because we want to reduce immigration to a reasonable amount and ensure that immigration is not used as a substitute for cheap labor. I mean, you want to ensure that you have skilled immigration coming in so that it is beneficial on the one hand, not just to the Canadian economy, to the immigrants themselves. I mean, you're not doing anyone a favor by bringing in people who you won't be able to necessarily care for so that you can exploit them for cheap labor on the basis that real Canadians don't want to do that type of work. I mean, when people call the party racist for this immigration policy, I just revert and say, you are actually the racist through that accusation, because on the one hand, you presuppose that the Canadians we're trying to protect are all white, when in fact, Canada is a very diverse country and we want to protect all of them, including the Indigenous populations that don't have clean drinking water, despite 6 years of liberal promises. I mean, you want to protect all Canadians, not just one demographic. And the fact that you would think that kind of is what I call through projection. Flip side, the idea of using immigration as a tool, as a substitute for cheap labor is racist, or it is exploitive. It is anti-immigrant in that you're looking at them not as, equals to come into Canada and be citizens with the rest of us. You're looking at them like the Kelly Osbourne comment to come in and do the dirty work that Canadians don't want to do. Kelly Osbourne on The View, she's like, Donald Trump, if you don't want immigrants, who's going to clean your toilet? And everyone on the show is like, ooh, you don't say that out loud, but that's effectively what the policy is. And that's how they view immigration. And it's a wrong, and I dare say, racist way to view immigration.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. And I noticed too that it's not like you guys are like shutting down immigration completely. I think the number is like 150,000 people a year, which is still, a lot.
It's a lot.
People, right?
That's like 4 years. That's the size of some provinces. I mean, it's a lot. And just
I'm from Newfoundland. It's more in 4 years. It's bigger than Newfoundland.
It is amazing. And the idea of saying, we want to make sure that they can actually find jobs, fill positions, and contribute to Canadian society. That's how you build a cohesive Canada, not by bringing people in who you're going to exploit and then further marginalize. I mean, that's not how you do it. Maybe that's how some politicians think you do it, but to call a responsible immigration policy racist, it's just more, point the finger at others when you have three pointing right back at you.
Well, Dave, I know that we got to go, unfortunately, but can you just leave us with some type of message and let people know where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find you on YouTube, and everything else that you do?
Well, so you can find me Viva Frei, YouTube. Viva PPC is the political channel where I explain the policies of the party. The Viva Frei Twitter, that's for Angry Dave. But I'll leave you with this. Despite what everyone predicted, despite what everyone thought, Donald Trump, whether you love him or you hate him, defied all odds and won in 2016. So do not give in to the defeatist mentality that the game is rigged and you've already lost. You go out there and you peacefully and respectfully fight for your political rights, express your thoughts, share your thoughts, try to bring other people over, because an avalanche starts with a snowflake, and the second you get one person to nudge four others and four others, that's how real movement occurs. I genuinely believe that this is the world in which we live. The problems we see now It's not going to be a judicial solution. It has to be a political solution. And we have to get a real voice of opposition in Parliament so that you don't just have four parties who agree with each other just to a questionable extent. And so despite what you think about the PPC's chances of success, I'm running in a Liberal district, 30 plus years Liberal. I am realistic about my chances, but spread the word. And we just need a handful of seats. And I think we might get more than that to get into Parliament and actually have meaningful opposition and actually to stand up for the rights of Canadian citizens. So that's what the PPC stands for. Don't believe the demonizing that you see in the media. Go look into it yourselves and just spend a few minutes reading on it and then spread the message.
That was beautifully said, and I think that you're going to garner a lot more PPC votes than people realize. And I think there's a lot of people out there too. Funny how you compared it to the Trump administration, where they were just kind of like afraid to admit that they were going to vote for Trump. I think there's going to be a lot of people who have been afraid that they're going to vote for Maxime and yourself. And I wish you guys all the best. And that being said, as well, Dave, you definitely got to come back on sometime. I think we had a great conversation today. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you so much again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.